Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into a source that gives this insider account. It's compelling, maybe even unsettling, about global power, money, influence. Our mission here is to pull out the key insights, the surprising facts, to help you understand the system the author calls a global empire.
And this whole deep dive, it's based on a book, a kind of confession, from someone who says he was a highly paid professional who cheated countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars.
Billions.
Yeah. He calls them economic hitmen. EHMs for short.
And his description of what they do, it's pretty stark. He claims these EHMs funnel money from places like the World Bank, USAID,
Like international organizations.
straight into the accounts of huge corporations and the pockets of a few super wealthy families controlling resources.
And the tools they use, he lists things like fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. It's quite a list. But what's really interesting, I think, is he says this game, this empire building, it's as old as empire itself. But he argues that globalization has given it these new and terrifying dimensions.
And he ends that thought with,
I should know. I was an EHM. Puts himself right in the middle of it.
so yeah. Throughout this deep dive, you'll hear his story, how he got recruited, what he did, and eventually how he started to question it all, and the massive impact these actions supposedly had. Okay, so where does this story even begin? Not where you'd expect for an economic hitman. He says he was a poor Puritan kid, rural New Hampshire.
But then he ends up at this very exclusive boys' boarding school.
Yeah, surrounded by, as he puts it, scions of wealthy families from Buenos Aires, Boston.
Not his background at all.
No, he felt like an outsider. And he mentions resenting how his own parents looked down on the local townspeople, called them lowly peasants.
And this mix of things, the frustrations, lack of status, lack of money, lack of social life, plus this real ambition to live the good life. That apparently made him the perfect target for intelligence agencies. They saw him as seducible.
But the really weird turn is how he actually gets pulled in. It's connected to the Vietnam War draft.
He's facing the draft, and suddenly this job offer pops up from the NSA.
The National Security Agency.
The very one. Turns out his wife's uncle was a big shot there, high-level executive. And the job was basically pitched as, here's how you avoid military service.
So less about patriotism, more about an alternative path.
Exactly. And this whole recruitment method, it reflects a bigger shift after World War II. Direct military conquest, like the old empires, became too risky. Nuclear weapons changed the game.
Right.
So the U.S., apparently inspired by things like the 1951 CIA coup in Iran, Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy's grandson, led that one. They developed a new strategy.
Which
identify potential EHMs, maybe through agencies like the NSA, but then get them hired by private international corporations, consultants, engineers, that kind of thing.
distances the government.
Precisely. If things get messy, if deals go sour, if people get hurt, it looks like corporate grade, not government action. Plausible deniability.
But before he becomes a full-blown EHM, he does a stint in the Peace Corps.
He's in the Ecuadorian Amazon, 1968 to 7, living with indigenous groups, the Shuar Inca descendants. He says he felt a real connection there. He also saw firsthand what he calls the deceitful and destructive practices of oil companies and government agencies operating there.
So it wasn't just a random posting.
The book suggests it served as a test, a proving ground. Because afterwards, he gets recruited by this big consulting firm, Maine.
And the connection.
The vice president who recruits him. Also an NSA liaison officer.
Okay, there it is.
And they wanted him specifically because he'd survived the Amazon. Because he was known for sticking his neck out. Other very qualified economists had just washed out down there. They failed miserably.
His rugged experience was actually a plus for this kind of work.
Then comes the training, handled by a woman named Claudine Martin, a special consultant.
What does she teach him?
How to create economic forecasts. But very specific ones, looking 20, 25 years ahead and focusing only on gross national product, GNP.
Why just GNP?
Because it's easier to inflate, basically. It helps justify huge loans for massive infrastructure projects, which crucially would be built by U.S. contractors.
So the loans weren't really about helping the country's people long-term?
According to him, no. The unspoken goal was, quote, create large profits for the contractors and assure the long-term financial dependence and therefore the political loyalty of governments around the world.
Financial dependence equals political loyalty.
That's the equation. The bigger the loan, the better. Even if it meant the country's poorest people would lose out on health, education, and other social services for decades.
And Claudine warned him.
Once you're in, you can never get out.
So he's trained, he understands the game, supposedly. Where does he go first? Indonesia, 1971.
Huge country, population-wise, oil-rich, Muslim nation, and as Claudine apparently told him, potentially the next domino after Vietnam, high stakes.
And his mission there.
Create those very optimistic economic forecasts, justify massive loans from USAID international banks for things like power grids, big infrastructure.
But with that key condition.
Exactly, the fine print. Engineering and construction companies from our own country must build all these projects.
So the loan money flows out from the U.S., pays U.S. companies, and then flows right back.
Pretty much. Most of the money never leaves the United States, but the target country, they're stuck with the debt, principal and interest.
Which leads to
Often inevitable default. And that's when the U.S., or the powers behind the EHM, get their pound of flesh.
meaning.
Control over UN votes, maybe rights to build military bases, access to oil or other resources, whatever leverage they need. That's the playbook he lays out.
This first mission caused some internal conflict for him.
He writes about struggling with the selfish reasons behind it all, promoting U.S. policy, corporate profits, driven by greed, not helping ordinary Indonesians.
How did he justify it to himself?
His main defense was thinking he was doing the right thing in the eyes of my culture, being a successful economist, climbing the ladder.
The definition of success within that system.
Which highlights how the system works, doesn't it? It relies on people making these kinds of compromises. Clash with an older colleague there, Howard Parker.
What happened?
Parker was the chief load forecaster, more experienced. And he basically called the author out, told him, they'll try to convince you this economy is going to skyrocket. Charlie's ruthless. Don't let him get to you.
Wow. Direct.
Oh, yeah. Parker accused him of selling out, said he would base his forecasts on reality, not some pie-in-the-sky economic study.
What happened to Parker?
He got sick, apparently, had to go back to the U.S.
Yeah.
And the author, Perkins, he took over Parker's role.
So he stepped right into the position of the guy who warned him.
Exactly.
There's a really striking anecdote from his time in Indonesia, something about a
Puppet show that DeLong. It's incredible. He describes seeing this performance that directly mocked U.S. foreign policy. There was a puppet of Richard Nixon and another character called Bucket Man, representing the World Bank. Nixon would literally eat countries off a map, yelling things like, Muslim dogs, before dropping them into Bucket Man's bucket. And then a puppet representing a Panamanian politician tried to stop them. Bucket Man just killed him.
That's incredibly blunt political commentary.
Right. He said locals sometimes called him an inquisitor or interrogator. That puppet show, plus talking to young Indonesians, showed him a completely different view. They saw U.S. actions as a blatant drive for empire.
And to mention Toynbee.
The historian Arnold Toynbee's prediction that the big conflict of the next century would be between Christians and Muslims made him realize U.S. policy felt myopic and selfish, not thinking about the future.
Okay, let's shift focus. The book moves on to Panama, a place obviously critical to U.S. interests because of the canal.
And the history there is key. Panama used to be part of Colombia right up until 1903.
What changed?
Theodore Roosevelt wanted to build the canal after the French failed. Colombia refused his treaty terms. So the U.S. sends a warship, backs a separatist movement, recognizes Panama as independent,
Installs
a puppet government, the author calls it, and they sign a canal treaty that apparently didn't have a single Panamanian signature on it. For the next 50, 60 years, Panama is ruled by this oligarchy, closely tied to U.S. interests.
But then in 1968, Omar Torrijos comes to power, a very different kind of leader.
Very different. Popular with the poor, known for actually walking through the slums, helping people find work. He was openly critical of U.S. influence.
Including that training center.
The School of the Americas, based in Panama at the time. Famous, or infamous, for training Latin American military figures, many linked to dictatorships. Torrijos wanted social reform, wanted Panama to be independent from the U.S., but without cozying up to the Soviets. A tricky balancing act.
And he was aware of the risks.
Oh, deeply aware. The author recounts Torrijos talking about CIA coups, Mossadegh in Iran, Arbenz in Guatemala, that Guatemala won linked to the United Fruit Company, which later got bought by George H.W. Bush's oil company, Zapata Oil. Small world.
So Torrijos knew the history.
And he apparently said, quite bluntly, the CIA itself will have to kill me.
The author arrives in Panama. What's his assignment this time?
To create a master development plan. But the real goal, he says, was to justify billions in loans from the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. He calls the whole plan a subterfuge, a way to get Panama so deep in debt it would become totally dependent, back to being a puppet state.
Did he feel guilty about this?
He mentions a paroxysm of guilt, but at the same time, He saw it as his opportunity of a lifetime to get rich and powerful within that EHM system.
That internal conflict again.
It's a recurring theme. And while he's there, his guide, a local named Fidel, makes sure he sees the reality.
Like
the huge gap between the rich Americans in the Canal Zone, who often didn't even speak Spanish, and the poverty in the Panamanian slums nearby.
graffiti.
Like, stop shitting in our canal. Death for freedom is the way to Christ. He even saw a Panamanian bouncer tell U.S. military police they couldn't touch the local waitresses and had to pay up front for anything else, showing that simmering resentment.
But the story takes a dark turn regarding Torrijos himself.
Torrijos died in a plane crash in 1981. The author flatly states he believes it was an assassination carried out by what he calls the fraternity of corporate, government, and banking heads whose goal is global empire.
That's a huge claim.
It is. And he connects it to later events, specifically the U.S. invasion of Panama in December 1989,
Operation Just Cause.
which the author describes as the largest airborne assault on a city since World War II. He argues it was an unprovoked attack on a civilian population.
Why then? What was the trigger, in his view?
He believes it was to stop Panama, under Noriega by then, but moving towards more independence, from gaining full control of the canal, especially since Japan was talking about financing a new, bigger canal.
And he mentioned something about the aftermath of the invasion.
He claims the U.S. Army blocked press and Red Cross access to the hardest hit areas for 3 days after the main assault. And during that time, soldiers incinerated and buried the casualties. A cover-up, essentially.
Okay, let's pivot again. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo. That was a massive shock to the system globally.
Huge. He says it brought developed nations to their knees. And critically, it massively strengthened what he calls the corporatocracy. His term for this alliance of big corporations, international banks, and government working together, often behind the scenes, to shape global events for their benefit.
And the oil crisis made oil
an obsession for Washington. Protecting the supply became paramount. This led the U.S. Treasury Department to focus heavily on Saudi Arabia. Its strategic importance was obvious.
So they created something called JCOR.
The U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Economic Commission. Its official aim was cooperation, but the author claims its real purpose, operating with almost zero congressional oversight despite spending billions, was to make sure Saudi oil money flowed back into the U.S. economy.
And this is where the author gets involved again in a very sensitive role.
Highly confidential. His project codename was Sama. He says it stood for Saudi Arabian Money Laundering Affair. That's his term for the plan he devised. The idea was to use U.S. companies to completely modernize Saudi Arabia. Build everything.
Like what?
Massive infrastructure. New garbage systems replacing the symbolic goats eating trash in the streets. Petrochemical plants, industrial parks, power stations. The works.
Where would the labor come from for all this construction?
That was key. Since Saudis weren't expected to do manual labor, the plan was to import workers from other Middle Eastern or Islamic countries.
Which created even more opportunity.
For U.S. companies, they'd build entire new cities for these workers, housing, shopping malls, utilities, a massive construction boom, all fueled by Saudi oil money, but built by American firms.
So what was the actual deal, the quid pro quo?
It was a core bargain, according to him. Washington promised total and unequivocal U.S. political and, if necessary, military support to keep the House of Saud in power, guaranteed their security.
And in return,
Saudi Arabia agreed to invest its billions of petrodollars back into the U.S. by buying U.S. government securities, like treasury bonds. Then the interest earned on those securities would be used by the Saudis to pay the U.S. companies hired for all the modernization projects.
So wait, the U.S. guarantees Saudi security? The Saudis park their oil money in U.S. debt. And then they use the interest from that debt to pay U.S. companies to build things in Saudi Arabia.
You got it. Essentially, U.S. companies get hired at Saudi expense, but the money mechanism keeps it all cycling through the U.S. system. It's quite ingenious in a way.
And different from the old model of just getting countries into debt with loans.
Very different. They didn't need loans from international banks. This set new and irrevocable precedents and became the model for managing oil wealth globally, a model later tried in places like Iraq.
But getting the Saudis to agree was that easy. He mentions persuading a Prince W.
A key figure. The prince was initially resistant, saw it as Western cultural imperialism, Christianization, through commercialism.
How did the author win him over?
He claims he used a combination of things. Hard statistics appealing to logic, but also. He mentions using a beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde woman named Sally to help build trust and influence the prince.
So the EHM toolkit included honey traps, potentially.
It seems implied, yes. And the consequences of this U.S.-Saudi deal were far-reaching. He points to one particularly startling example. Idi Amin.
The Ugandan dictator.
Yes. After he was overthrown in 1979, responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. Where did he get asylum? Saudi Arabia. Lived there in luxury cars, servants, the whole deal paid for by the House of Saud.
And the U.S. reaction?
The author says the U.S. quietly objected but refused to press the issue. Why? For fear of undermining its arrangement with the Saudis. That deal just too important.
Fast forward a few years. By 1977, the author's doing very well for himself. Youngest partner at Maine, yacht, lecturing at Harvard.
Publishing papers on economic forecasting models that were apparently quite famous in the industry. Living the high life he dreamed of.
But the guilt, the internal conflict, didn't go away.
It seems to have caught up with him. A woman named Paula, a Colombian fashion designer he met, played a big role.
How?
She confronted him about the human cost. Pointed out that the local people, indigenous communities in places like Colombia, hated his company for wrecking their lands. They sympathized with the guerrillas attacking his company's construction sites.
And that must have been hard to hear.
And then came the kicker. Paula revealed her own family supported the guerrillas. She told him these groups, labeled communists, terrorists, narcotics traffickers by the U.S., were often just people defending their homes, their way of life.
The drugs, the cocaine.
She argued they got pushed into it. They needed money for weapons trained in Russia or China, maybe, because the system he represented, the World Bank, the corporations, it forces them into this position. No other options.
How did he react to that?
It hit him hard. He writes, it made him detest myself for playing this role. He felt caught admiring the rebels' convictions, but trapped in his own EHM world, this no man's territory.
And Paula pushed him further.
Yeah, she made him look critically at his own resume, at a flattering corporate magazine article about him.
And what did he see?
The deception. Not lies, exactly, but what was left out. No mention of the NSA recruitment, the pressure for inflated forecasts, the goal of creating unrepayable debt.
Or the consequences, like financing figures like bin Laden or Idi Amin.
None of that was in the official story. He realized his expertise was actually very narrow, very specific to this manipulative game.
And he was bringing others into it.
He was seducing new recruits into the EHM life without telling them the whole truth, perpetuating a system he now saw as morally repugnant and ultimately self-destructive.
He uses strong language about himself.
Very strong. He concluded he'd been a slaver, exploiting people, and he felt he had to atone.
So he quits Maine, April 1st, 1980, April Fool's Day.
Symbolic, perhaps, but getting out wasn't clean. He immediately gets work as a highly paid expert witness for U.S. utility companies, using his skills to justify controversial projects like the Seabrook nuclear power plant. Still part of the system, in a way.
And then those deaths in 1981, Roldos in Ecuador, Torrijos in Panama.
Both presidents had recently challenged U.S. corporate interests. Both died in fiery plane crashes within months of each other. He reiterates his belief. Assassinations.
Even when he tried to do something different, starting an alternative energy company.
IPS was successful. But looking back, he sees it as just a new version of old EHM techniques. He admits its success partly depended on coincidences, favors from people in powerful positions. He got a specific tax break from the U.S. Congress. Still connected, still benefiting from the system.
The system didn't want to let him go.
In 1987, he gets another offer. Big money consulting contract with Stone & Webster, SEP UEC. But there's a very explicit one, a retainer payment, essentially hush money. He will not write about anything that touches on the nature of our business here or the work you did at Maine. No politics, no international banks, no development projects, silence.
Did he take it?
He says he felt he betrayed my daughter, my family, and my country, but felt he had little choice. He took the deal.
Then comes September 11th, 2001. That seems to be a major turning point for him, a final catalyst.
A huge wake-up call. He was actually in the Amazon jungle with the Shuar people he'd known from his Peace Corps days when he heard the news.
And later, he visited Ground Zero.
Yes. He describes this profound experience there, seeing the devastation, but also seeing the symbols of financial power nearby 14 Wall Street, Bankers Trust Old HQ, Chase Bank Tower built with Rockefeller oil money, the symbols of the corporatocracy.
And he had an encounter there.
With an old Afghan man. The man just looked at him, looked him up and down and said, "You're a soldier." That, plus seeing those buildings, it solidified his whole understanding of his own past role within this global empire.
And it made him think about the average American's perspective.
He asks how many people think about the consequences. The ruined pomegranate farms in Afghanistan, the 24,000 who starve every single day globally.
Do people connect their lifestyle?
Their jobs and gas-guzzling cars and their interest payments, do they connect that to the wider world system, the one they're passing on? It's a tough question.
He then draws a direct line from this EHM history to the 2003 Iraq War.
He does. He frames the invasion as what happens when the EHMs fail, and even the next level, the jackals, his term for CIA assassins, fail to control a leader like Saddam Hussein.
So military invasion is the last resort.
In his model, yes. And he points out how quickly the news came out about reconstruction contracts in Iraq going to companies like Bechtel,
Halliburton, where Dick Cheney was formerly CEO.
For the author, this was just the same old story repeating. Debt, deception, enslavement, exploitation. Basically, the Saudi money laundering model applied to Iraq by force.
His implication is, if Saddam had just played the game like the Saudis,
he might have stayed in power. Cooperate with the corporatocracy, recycle the oil money, allow U.S. companies access, and maybe avoid invasion. It's a cynical view, but consistent with his thesis.
And this journey brings him back to Ecuador in 2003.
He meets with indigenous groups still fighting oil companies.
And they tell him stories that sound familiar.
Elected leaders who opposed the oil companies, died in plane crashes, tribal officials who wouldn't sign away land rights, discredited with forged documents, fake signatures, another type of assassination, he calls it.
It's the same tactics.
And he noticed something else there, the difference in media coverage. Ecuadorian newspapers were openly discussing connections between the Bush family, Cheney, oil interests, and the Iraq War. Just laying it out there in a way you wouldn't see in mainstream U.S. media at the time.
So after laying all this out, this history, these mechanisms, where does he leave us? What's the takeaway? He mentions a prophecy.
The prophecy of the condor and eagle. He says he encountered it all over Latin America. It's this indigenous idea that humanity split onto two paths ages ago.
The condor and the eagle.
The condor represented heart, intuition, connection to the earth. The eagle representing the mind, the rational, material, technological, more like the path the West took.
The prophecy says
that starting around the 1990s, these two paths could finally come back together. The condor and eagle could fly in the same sky, learn from each other, leading to a leap in human consciousness, a more conscious species. It offers hope.
But it also gives a stark warning about the current system's vulnerability.
He argues the whole global empire rests heavily on the U.S. dollar being the world's standard currency.
And the U.S. ability to print more dollars.
Exactly, which allows the U.S. to issue loans that maybe it never truly expects to be fully repaid in a conventional sense. The debt itself is the leverage.
But if that changes,
if another currency, say the euro, or maybe something else entirely, seriously challenged the dollar's dominance, or if major creditors started demanding repayment in a different currency, he warns that could shake the empire to its foundations. It's a potential Achilles heel.
So we've gone through this whole journey, this confession. It's heavy stuff. How does he wrap it up? He frames the book itself as a first step.
He calls writing the book his first step toward redemption, a personal act of confession.
But then he turns it towards the reader, towards you listening.
He basically asks us to engage in our own confession, to ask ourselves some tough questions. What do I need to confess? How have I deceived myself and others? Where have I deferred responsibility? Why have I allowed myself to be sucked into a system that I know is unbalanced? It's quite direct.
He's really challenging people to look at their own complicity, maybe unconscious complicity in these global systems.
And then he asks, okay, what are you going to do? What actions will you take to ensure kids everywhere get a shot at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to end starvation, to prevent future 9/11s?
Big questions. Does he offer answers?
He calls for a revolution in our approach to education. We need to empower ourselves and future generations to think, to question, and to dare to act. Don't just accept the status quo.
He uses that phrase.
The world is as you dream it. He urges us to consciously choose a different dream, move away from the nightmare of polluting industries towards a new dream of sustainability and equality.
It sounds almost like a revolutionary call to action, echoing someone like Thomas Paine from the American Revolution.
That's exactly the comparison he draws. He sees it as a similar moment, a call to awaken. The hour is ours, he suggests. The choice is yours. What course will you take?
A powerful place to leave it. Makes you think.